Hey everyone, welcome to the event, the M&E Storage Show. So, come on, we had to do that. We have to make fun of it, right? This is how it's going to be. Yeah, storage is no longer a dirty word. So this is where we want to go with you guys today. For everybody that's listening, first and foremost, my name's Scott. I'll be the moderator, the referee. I don't know, guys. What am I today?
Basically.
Yeah.
Keep us all under control, Scott.
There you go. So with us today, Mr. Bob Herzan, CEO of Scale Logic. Bob, thanks for joining us as always. Bryson Jones, CIO, North Shore Automation. Bryson, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Matt.
And Jeremy Strubin, Vice President, Squarebox Systems, Cat TV. Guys, are you ready to get this rolling?
Yeah, man.
I think so.
Let's do it.
All right. So here's the warning for the audience today. This is not, like I said, this is not a webinar. Don't expect tons of boring slides. Don't expect, just to read the text that's on the screen. This is an open discussion. Consider this almost basically podcast format where we are going to, we're just going to make stuff up as we go along when I present these different topics to the panelists here. So let me just set the stage first. So the world as we know it, 2020 has been a pretty interesting year, as everybody knows. Media and post-production organizations have to do far more with far less, I guess, or at least in what they have. There's, they're being pressed in a lot of different ways. And of course, this means that storage and workflow infrastructure, you got to calculate it, you got to be strategic, you got to be tactical. So that's what we want to discuss today. So really it's, we're embracing the, going forward, what everybody has to do, how they have to rethink things. We're going to challenge some preconceptions today, and let's get right into it. So topic number one, gentlemen, ready to rumble?
Let's do it.
All right, so Bob, I'm going to start off with you on this one. Why and how should organizations stop moving media within storage systems? Let's hear it.
Let's hear it. All right. Well, I think this one goes way, way back, and it goes back into legacy workflows. The way that our industry, and specifically media and entertainment, have worked is they used to work on islands. So they had different types of technologies that they would use in order to achieve a specific part of the workflow. And when they did that, they were forced to move files from one tier of storage to another tier of storage to another tier of storage. So you had, fiber channel technology that happened to be more built around a proprietary file system that handled media files really, really well. You had direct attach that gave them the ability to be remote or ingest from different locations and then bring it into that SAN. And then you had NAS file systems that back in the day didn't perform as well. And so they were really used as a second tier. So based on those three types of technology or topologies, you were forced to move the media. Now, over the decades, and Jeremy, me, Bryson, we've all been there for 20, 30 plus years. So we've seen this whole thing evolve. The technology has changed, the performance has changed, the tiers and the way that you need to manage that media have all changed. So if the person or the company sticks to a workflow that was built in 1990 or even the early 2000s, instead of advancing forward, they're going to continue to do the things that they used to do because that's the way they're comfortable. And just like we've changed with the COVID and people working remote editing has been something possible for years, yet people didn't do it because that's not the way they were used to work. When they got forced into it, all of a sudden they found out, hey, there are ways to make this work. We can produce programs remotely. We can do this. So it's the same concept. We got to stop moving files because we don't need to anymore. We can build very large file systems. We can manage large file systems, and we can limit the amount of resources we're using, manpower we're using, that's costing these facilities just tons and tons of money that they don't actually calculate.
Jeremy, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I mean, when we all started in this, it was arduous to add storage to your environment. And when I'm talking storage, I'm talking about, that online tier 1 high performing storage. It was arduous to grow that inside a file system, as Bob said. It was kind of like, you took it down and you put a whole new thing in, and you kind of migrated that media over to a new thing, which was bigger. Okay, well, that's not really the case anymore. We don't need that, obviously, because these file systems are scalable and they can kind of grow as the customer grows and all of that. So that need isn't there anymore. And there's kind of something, it's like a human nature thing. So, if you were going to retire a storage asset, let's say, it doesn't meet your storage capabilities at this point, and there was a cap or there was a ceiling on it. We had this conversation all the time. Well, what do you do with that if you're going to retire that? If you're going to buy something new that has more performance or a larger file system, it's human nature to want to not throw that thing away. I had a guy who was remodeling his basement the other day, and he just had all this crap sitting in a corner, and he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I just feel like it's still good, and I need to keep this stuff, that I tore out of this basement. And it's like, come on, man, get rid of it. But that was kind of the thing, right? So that first tier turned into a second tier, and people are moving files back and forth, and it's just, it's just kind of nonsense and not necessary anymore these days.
Do you think there's a barrier to entry to this, though? I mean, like both of you guys have mentioned the same thing. This is the way we've always done it scenario. What is it that brings, like, what is it that's stopping people from moving forward? Like, I mean, obviously there's an evolutionary step to be taken here. I mean, Bryce, maybe you can.
Yeah, if you guys look back like a year, like it feels like 10 years ago, the last NAV, I did an event with Scale Logic, and there's a deck. You can actually get a recording of it, and we can get you the deck of it. But what I said was that shared storage was a game changer back in the day, but very few people really changed their game, right? They left their old systems in place. The reason for that was that the decisions were made typically, like how things got laid out, were made by either who got there first, right? So you have somebody with seniority, right? Or who was the loudest, right? The rock star editor or post soup or whatever. So those people a lot of times are not able to change. I mean, like my whole life is just being wrong, right? My whole life is that I'm watching for how I'm wrong. One of the greatest things Jeremy Strootman ever said about my company is Jeremy Strootman said, North Shore is looking and then making a plan for when you fail, right? So I'm constantly looking for when I'm wrong, when the company's wrong, when something is wrong. People aren't doing that. People are looking at what they did. Right. So what's happening is just the downsides of this, why, how they should stop is they really need to actually look at getting someone, they should probably just get some help. Right. I don't want to do it anymore, but they should get some outside help, because sometimes there's an argument you can't solve inside the building. So you want to go to your reseller, you want to get somebody who's really good with consulting and help you with that. But the thing is about the why, two things that, we're talking about is that you're making duplicates, right? You're creating duplicates because nobody does this perfectly when they move media, or they're scared to delete. So all of a sudden it's costing you money because you're buying storage to keep all these dupes that you did. And then you're losing time, right? You're losing a ton of time. You're sitting there waiting, no matter how fast your storage is, you're still waiting on things to happen. And it just, at that point, when you look at time and duplication and inefficient use of storage, there is no argument for not consolidating your storage into simpler volume structures and redoing it. But yeah.
So you say it costs people money. I mean, any one of you guys jump in here. It's like, why is that cost not being calculated? Like, is there, what's missing? Like, is this spooky math? Is this what is it?
Yeah, well, one, it's subtle, right? Like, look, man, we do a review every quarter of all the things that are on our credit card that are reoccurring, right? And every quarter we find something that we signed up for that we forgot, right? So they trickle along in the background, and that's the business model, right? I love that Bob, I mean, I just got to say, I love the fact that Scale Logic even bothers to tell somebody, because it's actually acting against their best interest, because you guys make more money if people just forget they have stuff, right? So the fact that you care about people managing their storage, just let me give you credit for that, right? That you even have us here. And then the second thing is lack of tools. It's very difficult with a traditional, without a dam, right? Or without some sort of indexing, right? So the dumber your storage is, I use that term because that's what we're here, free form. The dumber your storage is, and the less business intelligence you have applied to that storage, the more likely that you don't even know what you're doing, right? You don't know where you're losing money, right? So yeah.
So,
but to answer your question, Scott, I mean, bottom line, the barrier to entry is far lower than it's actually ever been. So it's almost inexcusable at this point, really.
Yes. And that's what we're seeing, Scott. Like Jeremy and I have been out on this tour of just saying, like, there's no excuse for you not to do this. We don't sell storage anymore. Like, we're not storage guys, but we're just so bummed out that this is happening. And it also complicates my life and business. So that's my part of it, but yeah.
Let me put Bob on the spot for a moment, just for something that Bryson, you mentioned. Bob, why are you so nice? Why are you calling this stuff out?
Why are we nice?
He's from the Midwest.
Any other way. It's Minnesota nice. Yeah,
it's Minnesota nice, man.
No other way. There's so much that we can do for clients, and getting the initial sale in there for the storage is absolutely the barrier of entry to building a relationship with a client. But those relationships are built on long term. We know that they're going to have to scale over time. We know that they're going to have to make plans in their workflow. The team I've got here has spent 30 years being together, working with ISVs, working with different storage companies. We become really a trusted advisor, a consultant into these clients. So I would rather drive an efficient storage platform for those people so that I can keep them long term. And it's worked so well. We have so many customers that we're in the 3rd and 4th generation refresh for them because they trust in what we do. So that's the goal. I don't need to go sell them one and done. I want to sell them over the course of their life cycle as a company.
So Minnesota nice it is. Okay.
We'll use it.
All right.
Let's do that too.
Topic. So this one will be. So this is a tough one, I guess. Again, I'll talk about spooky math and those kind of things. But it's so organizations looking at reducing budget. What does automation truly do? And let's not go into the whole, let's not mention terms like digital transformation and stuff. That nobody wants to hear that. Like, let's get into the nitty gritty on this. So Jeremy, I'm going to put you on the spot first. Let's talk about this.
Well, look, the reality is you've got a bunch of folks working at these organizations who, went to school or for one thing or another. They have a passion for, the creative process, and that's why they got into this. And what they ended up doing, in real life is copying files, as we kind of alluded to, or doing a bunch of manual tasks to keep the organization running and keeping the show running, right? So, by introducing automation, you're really freeing that person or team of people up to do what it is that they really are supposed to be doing. Bryson and I, Bryson interviewed a customer of ours who, we had asked, Bryson and his team did an amazing job of automating a lot of redundant processes that centered around emailing and spreadsheets going back and forth and copying data out of one thing and putting it into another thing.
Just digitizing, right?
Yeah, just digitizing the entire digitizing process and all of that, and ingest process. And we kind of asked, like, hey, did anybody, what did those people who used to do that do now?
Yeah.
And the customer said, look, they're assistant editors. So now they're actually assisting editors. So, by introducing automation, you're really cutting out all of those inefficiencies. So you can do more of the things that actually make you money. At the end of the day, putting these creative people into the role where they, that they kind of intended for themselves, in life is one thing, but also by allowing that organization to sell more of the product that they're trying to sell. That's ultimately the goal, right? So that's what we want to be able to enable people to do.
You mentioned something that is oddly terrifying, I guess, just since when you talk about Excel spreadsheets. I think everybody that's, envisions any kind of Excel spreadsheet in this day and age it's, you know, it's akin to, we're going to keep having meetings until we figure out why no work is getting done.
Right.
You know, managing that side of things is horrible. I mean, Bryson, I'm going to ask you this. I mean, it's, you know, as far as we keep mentioning the word sort of like, you know, evolution, right? Where it's like we're trying to, you know, convince people to move on to sort of the next, you know, thing that can greatly help their organization. How hard is that evolutionary jump? I'll say even administratively, from going from that crazy idea of somebody sitting there managing spreadsheets all day to actually going to become an assistant editor. Like where does that?
So it's a nightmare, right? So there, look, there's a reason where a guy who looks like he's in the Hells Angels or something became like, you know, get to my position, right? And that is because we do not do things the normal way, right? So Jeremy and I have been on a tour of not doing things the normal way together now for a couple of years. Our companies have worked together loosely for a decade, and Jeremy really pulled us in together. Here's a couple of jokes for you. North Shore Automation called ourselves North Shore Automation 6 years before anyone in production wanted to automate anything, right? Nobody was able to, because you need. And then the second thing is that nobody likes their dam, right? We joke about it. No one likes their dam. No one actually wants a dam. You get a dam because you have to have one. But the thing that North Shore did that was unusual, and I really give Jeremy a lot of credit for seeing it. Jeremy came in, we joke a lot with each other, but he has an amazing analytical mind. And he looked at what I was doing and he's like, wait a minute, you're not using CatDV in our case as a dam. Like, nope, we're using as a media platform to orchestrate automation, right? So I hate when people aren't specific though. So I want to go back to a specific thing. So one thing is, yes, people are scared, right? So that question that I asked him was, I asked the guy, did anybody get fired? Right? Because what we did specifically.
I was dancing around it, man. I was dancing around.
Yeah, no, I was like, did you fire people? Right? Because the reason is that, like, if you're going to talk about automation, you have to talk at the executive level, because no one at the bottom wants to talk about automating. They might lose their job. That's not actually what happens. Like what Jeremy said is what happens. In this case, for that Prometheus gig, which you can, there's videos of all that from our companies together. But if you look at those videos, we took a process that 4 people were doing over like kind of a whole day, and we listed in there, and it became a job for one person in a matter of a couple of hours. So somebody is able to kick off all the automated work that 4 people were doing on 12 Avid Media composers. It's all being done now with Content Agent, you know, and CatDV, and then some North Shore software onto Stereologic storage. So that was the huge story, because all of a sudden these, like you said, these assistant editors can now assist editors. They can do string outs. They can do all the things an assistant editor is supposed to do, so they learn to become a real editor, right? The other thing that happens is that assistant editors get stuck in their job. You can never get rid of a good assistant. You can never promote them. In Los Angeles, if you're an awesome assistant, you don't get promoted till you leave the company, and then you move up. And so by automating processes, then someone else could come in. So we joke, the bad news is we give you the ability to fire somebody, because if they don't do their job, you'll know, because it's automated. But we also give the ability to get promoted. So if you're good and you want to be creative, you should really love seeing us come in the door. But
that's an interesting point on that one, is that, you know, like one of the things that, and again, like I go back to the beginning of this event when we were saying that, you know, people kind of need to reevaluate where they're even spending money, trying to get everything out of what they have, is that, you know, does this fall into that category of being cognizant of what you're spending money on as it comes to the time talent ratio, right? Is that, like, a lot of the times, like, there's people that get hired that, you know, you're paying a lot of money to, because they're experts in their field, yet they end up doing these, you know, menial tasks. And I'll just go back to the Excel spreadsheets, because Excel.
Yeah, let me address that specifically, because that's a big one right now. So one of the biggest changes that we've seen is that everything that's in, so shared storage starts the process. Then CatDV, which has APIs, you have a DAM that has API connections, right? So if you're writing in an Excel doc on your desktop computer, well, you're actually not doing it the way you should be doing it in 2020, right? You should be in a Google Doc or an Airtable or a Smartsheets. Now, once you make that transition from your desktop, a single file, into something that's connectable via an API, so then you could start to get that data in, right? So you can connect a Google Sheet, and CatDV can be watching a Google Sheet, right? You know, or watching an Airtable sheet. And so you can bring that data in. One of my mandates when I started the company and we went into it was that if anybody was copying and pasting data from one document to another, that is a place we need to end. We have that you're wrong and you're losing time. And like you said, it's brainless effort that someone's inevitably they're going to do it wrong. Connect it via an API, make it intelligent, and then all of a sudden there's a smooth. We've had media workflows for smooth data flows for years. Now we can have smooth metadata pipelines and workflows that match those, right?
And then also associated to that, Scott, is so you've got that layer of the workflow orchestration going on, but that can only work smoothly and well if you change the storage infrastructure behind it. So Bryson says shared storage. Well, not all shared storage is the same.
That's right.
And what you're looking for is intelligent shared storage. People who are building storage systems have to evolve, like we've talked about, into also automating a number of things that was a manual process within the facility. So we had the dumb storage, we talked about that. It didn't do anything. It was a bit bucket that just protected data. Big deal, that's what it's supposed to do. But you have to be able to tier that data. You have to be able to move that data. You have to be able to replicate that data, back that data up, and you want to automate that into the file system and into the storage that's there so that that doesn't even become a thought. Your data is protected, the integrity is there. You've built a single file system that now this application or orchestrator can easily manage and doesn't get confused or doesn't get forced bad data by having multiple duplicates and different types of links going left and right.
Yeah, you can throw off the automations if that was the case. It would screw everything up.
Yeah, I mean, and a case in point was the move from like a volume locking SAN, right? My company was hobbled. Like I have a company that I work with that had volume locking SAN. They bought a dam 10 years ago and we built it out for them. And we hit a point and I just said, this is where we stop. And they were like, well, why? And I said, because everything has to be manually unlocked by somebody. And that's not how automation works. So they basically, it was, in their case, it was 5 years until they got rid of that storage. And when they got rid of that storage, all of a sudden they had a fully automated ingest workflow and all this processing, right? Everything happened. So if you look at that, they had CatDV for 5 years and it did nothing. It literally did nothing except give them a way that people could drag and drop manually things in. The minute they changed their storage architecture, all of a sudden we were able to go in and do an outrageous project that now, that like we laugh now, like there's jobs that just, there's jobs that nobody has to do anymore. They just check and make sure it's running, but otherwise they're off doing creative work. So.
So Bob, let me ask you a question on this, just because I know that you guys keep a close eye on, well, all sort of types of analytics. This is more of a finance question. I'm just going to put you on the spot for this, and it's please just feel free to tell me to go away, and we'll go on to the next topic.
How much money do you have in your wallet? Is that where you're going with this guy?
Yeah, well,
$7.
So it's funny you mentioned that. So it's about putting money back into your wallet. When we're talking about automation, like a lot of the stuff that you guys just mentioned was the ability to offset a lot of really cumbersome tasks that people would have to do, and there would be mistakes and all those kind of things. Bob, in your experience, and look, I'm just looking for a ballpark here, but give me a percentage on, like, we talk about, as the topic says, right, reducing budgets, but there's also this concept of reallocating budgets. Like when you take all the time, effort, those kinds of things that go into something like, somebody doing a menial task and then taking them and moving them somewhere else, that budget, whatever it may be, is sort of alleviated to put towards different things. Do you see a percentage in, call it savings, but it's not really savings because it's just money that you can use for bigger, better, cooler things?
Yeah, I'm sure there's a number out there, Scott, and it depends on the size of the company and how much fat they had associated to a particular job.
Right.
I think it becomes more the same scenario as going back a couple decades when we moved into nonlinear editing, and what did that do for the editor himself? We built efficiencies in there, and we gave him the ability to actually spend more time being creative. Right. And so it's the same concept. You're driving more efficiencies into your business. you're allowing these particular employees to spend more time in supporting the end result of the company, which is trying to be creative, trying to produce their product, trying to do it quickly, trying to do it at a lower cost point, all those things, and not being bottlenecked by something that was never meant to be part of their business. They weren't supposed to be IT directors, and they weren't supposed to be technicians, and they weren't supposed to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning because a couple of drives failed and they had to replace them, or they had to recopy media because they lost this. That wasn't what their job was. So we've taken all that waste away. So do you want to call it, we gave them back 30% of their day? Probably.
Yeah, there you go. And I mean, that also translates too, is like on the other end, right? Is that the more you alleviate all of this busy work, I'm just going to call it for what it is, and things that have nothing to do with their day job, is that once people can do their day job, say for instance, like let's go with the number of 30%. Realistically, if that frees up 30% of their time, does that immediately translate to 30%, or at least close to it, more business as far as output, which means more profit and those types? So
Yeah.
The place that Jeremy and I have, our company's growth is not based on people wanting to get dams all of a sudden. It's not. Our company's growth is because Jeremy and I were able to go out together, and Jeremy's really good at this, and say, well, there's no budget, right? There's no budget here for any dam. Okay, well, let's look at what's around you. So Scott, where you can look at, and this happens in corporate a lot, Jeremy, we should really mention this, is that in corporate video, for instance, you have a certain budget. Well, you're providing a certain service to people. When you provide more services to your internal clients, whether that is sharing their media or automating things or taking services in-house that used to be out-of-house, all of a sudden you can collect that budget, right? You've got some service provider that you paid to do captioning. Well, if you bring us in and we connect you to an AI generated captioning that automatically captions, well, you're not paying that caption company anymore, right? It's being automated. So things like that, I will tell you that Jeremy and I made our own budgets because we went and, like what you're saying, we went and found money that elsewhere that really should come into the video department. Right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've got a great customer that we've been working with for the past year, who, their output was at capacity. They were at their ceiling, right? So in order to sell more product and in order to sell more show, they would have to hire more people to raise that ceiling up. Yeah. Bryson and I went in and did a bunch of work in there, and they've been able to double their output, triple their output. Bryson has an example that's staggering with a customer he works very closely with. But at that point, it becomes a conversation of, well, how good are your salespeople? How much more can they sell? Because Bryson and I will just keep lifting the ceiling up if that's
you can turn it. What Jeremy's speaking of is we have a customer on the East Coast that was managing 38,000 files the first year we worked with them, and 3 years later they were managing, well, 4 years later they were managing 1 million with the same team. They had a 4-person team. They did 38,000 jobs, right? We automated that. Yeah, and so understand that, that company loves us. That company invites us back regularly, right? But that's the kind of partnership we're talking about, is show us your pain points, right? And we'll help you. And that's where, like you said, so we can actually increase sales, whether those sales are externally or they're internally of what you do, for your company. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. Hey, before we go on to the next topic, also for the listeners, whatever questions you may have, please enter them in the chat. We've got folks standing by, some really brilliant people that can answer just about anything you can throw at them. So please feel free that as we continue to rant on about all these topics, that ask away. They're there for you. So Scott, let's go on to the next topic here. This will be a fun one.
Hey Scott, I just want to mention that everyone should know that those people, they are as smart as us. They're just not as pretty as us, so that's why they're not on camera.
And obviously, they are not working on their careers an extra for.
You got the face man. You get the face man here on the call.
Sons of Anarchy is looking for you, pal. I think you have a full new career waiting for you. You just have to go for it. So, okay, so let's get on to topic number 3, so we don't continue talking about Bryson's beer. So, the reality and inevitability of petabyte storage. file sizes are ridiculous. So let's discuss that. Bryce, I'm going to start with you on this one.
All right, yeah. I mean, I don't sell storage, right? So, but storage makes my life easier, right? So we'll talk later about what we have a little topic about that. But for me, particularly, I sort of like I see customers constantly shuffling and moving things, right? And so when you get to you're talking about digital transformation, which all the BS around that. But if you look at true digital companies, if you look at Facebook, Google, these people, they don't fuss around about storage, because now storage is actually, no matter, you can argue all day, you can call Bob and talk about this, or anybody from ScaleLogic, storage is cheaper than the hassle of managing it. You literally could just buy storage cheaper than you manage it. Now we want you to intelligently manage, but there's a certain point at which you have to just have a certain level. And I want to call out a couple things. One, in the old days, a petabyte was impossible when we started, and then a petabyte was 7 figures, and then a petabyte was 6 figures, and now a petabyte is no longer 6 figures. So that's a big change that I was not even keeping up with that, right? I had to ask the other day, what does a petabyte cost? And the answer is staggeringly low. The other piece of it is that when you think about it, and this is the example we used the other day, if you think about Amazon, Amazon's got a warehouse that is optimized for efficiency, and everything is in a certain place. So when Amazon fills up their shelves, they don't take everything down and rework it and then reprogram all the robots and all the people that are there. No, they simply just add to the warehouse. So while we say, oh yeah, we want to make sure you're not inefficiently using storage, we also do want to say that sometimes when you increase, it just makes sense to do it and stop thinking so precious. I have people call me and they go, well, we're sitting on about 100 terabytes. And I'm like, you're adorable, right? You're adorable. You have 100 terabytes. That must be so challenging for you, right? Meanwhile, my company a couple of weeks ago moved a petabyte in the cloud for one of our customers, right? So, in a day. So you've got situations like that where like you have these wild capabilities. So I just want to say that like I really want managers and business owners to rethink that and go back. If you're spending crazy money for large size, that's something you should probably in 2020 you should evaluate.
Well, that goes. It just what you said just reminded me too. Is like I'm sure everybody's heard that. Was it Bill Gates that was quoted back in like the 80s or something that said, I can't remember what the storage was, but it's like, no one's ever going to need more than like what was it, like a couple megs of storage or something ridiculous like that.
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
I do recall that.
Really goes on about being embarrassed about it. So.
I was actually doing this business back in the late 80s, and I was thinking about it based on this question. And throughout my entire career, growing up through this, I started out with things like 80 gigabyte cartridges that we were using, and then these things were massive dishwashers that we were putting these little 80 gigabyte cartridges, and we thought it was high capacity. And then a few years go by, and all of a sudden we're onto 350 gigabyte dual parallel transfer drives that weighed about 350 pounds and are ridiculously slow, but they were the fastest thing ever. And we couldn't believe it when it moved to the little 5.25-inch RAM drives that were, 700 terabytes now, or 700 gigabytes, I'm sorry. And so it constantly, every few years, we would have these huge jumps in capacity. And focusing in on this industry, we needed the capacity, but we always kept looking at it from a salesperson's position going, well, if we go from a 500 gigabyte drive to a 1 terabyte drive, that means we're going to have to sell twice as much storage to make the same amount of money. Well, it never worked out that way, because the math for our industry was just gobbling up this data that they needed. So it never stopped. The guy that I used to sell, a 100 terabyte solution to now is a 500 terabyte solution. That was just 2 years ago.
Right.
That 500 terabyte guy is a petabyte, and the petabyte guy, he wants 3 petabytes and he wants 4 petabytes off site. So it's just a never ending story within this industry on how they use the capacity.
So Bob, to that point, do you think, I know we keep talking about sort of this evolutionary state. There's two things we're talking about really that's running in parallel here, is that the technology that goes along with the actual storage itself, and then the technology that creates data. Do you see those growing in tandem, like on an equal level? Is data still outpacing storage capabilities, vice versa? Like how do you kind of see this playing out in the next you know, now and then into the next few years?
I see it just continuing the way it has. The performance is catching up. So that's a big deal where performance was lagging, and that's why we had to use, you know, more proprietary file systems and technology in order to achieve the results that the applications were requesting. Now the technology, more from an IT perspective, is catching up. You know, we have very fast Ethernet, we have very inexpensive Ethernet, we have multiple protocols that can be shared across the Ethernet. We have bigger drives. We've got different types of drives, so we can go with NVMe. The bus is changing internally. All this stuff is now kind of come into a position where we can take not standard off-the-shelf IT equipment, but IT infrastructures tuned for media workflows and give them file systems that are scalable, storage systems that are scalable, and applications that are more friendly with them than they were with the proprietary file system. So we've simplified everything, and I think we've brought more interoperability into it by doing so.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I'm going to ask you this. I mean, as I'm going to refer to you as sort of the quote unquote boots on the ground, given that what your role is. How do you see this playing out? What are your predictions when it comes to petabyte storage?
Well, I mean, it's you know, obviously it's already handled. All of us deal with customers that already have multiple petabytes of storage, and those who, you know, don't currently will, right? There are new, huh?
Then you know who you are. Okay.
Yeah, and you know who you are. You know, the reality is you know, people, specifically to our industry, the communication industry through the medium of video, I mean, obviously this is growing and people are finding new ways to use the tool of video, right? Just the other day, I was brushing up on some, you know, some business knowledge that I would normally get out of a business book or a blog or something along those lines. And, you know, this person who I followed for years has completely moved 100% video based, just in terms of communications, whether or not that's a, you know, 5-minute tip and trick video, whether or not that's an interview with another sales colleague that lasts an hour or so. You know, all of that stuff I used to read, and now it's all in the form of video, right? So that person switched his entire business model and communication method over to video. So this is just going to, I mean, a petabyte, we'll probably look at this next year and just kind of laugh at it, because everybody's going to.
And Jeremy, I want to mention, Jeremy, I want to mention a thing away. So this is one thing that's very concrete, Scott, to help you wrap this for people watching. A concrete thing is this, is that you can avoid having to talk to Jeremy and I for quite a while if you're just willing to scale your storage, right? So if you're having an argument internally about what to keep online and what not to keep, and you have an argument about, well, how do we do this, or data retention or any of that, well, you can stall the implementation of sort of this intelligence by actually just scaling up, right? So that's the big thing I want to mention, is that working against our best interest, we want to work for people that really need what we are doing. We don't want to be imposing a solution in need of a problem. So the reason I bring this up is so often I'll come in to consult with somebody to start, and they're like, well, we have this thing where we need to move this off, and we move it, and we move it. I go, well, how big is that? And they're like, well, it's like 40 terabytes of data. I'm like, just buy drives and be done, right? Don't even talk to me. Don't even buy my stuff, because we're not here to solve those problems, right? We're solving when you've got half a petabyte that you're worried about access to, or whatever, or more. And that number is going to change every year. So we'll just say that, like, it is funny that you can manage a little bit of storage, or maybe you can get rid of some of that management by just having more storage, right? Now, again, that's not always, you know, sometimes you're just kicking the can down the road, but sometimes you just need to kick the can. So in 2020, if you can't attack an asset management problem, you might be able to just like upgrade your storage. So that's another reason that we're together in this, is that, you know, we like ScaleLogic are like, yeah, we don't always have the answer for you, right? Sometimes the answer is Bob, and, you know, and just that.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how often that is the actual answer. Just get your storage story straight and then call me back, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
But the thing is that all three of you mentioned something, and again, it goes back to just that word inevitability. I mean, Jeremy, you were saying that you know, you're seeing people just from a communication side of things moving strictly to video now. And I mean, obviously video is becoming a huge thing. It's not just, you know, what people consider to be, you know, television, movies, commercials, those kind of things. If you look at the way the world communicates, I mean, just I'll throw this in just the mix as like from a social commentary side of things, is that I watched this really great documentary last night, of all things, on the Comedy Store. And they were talking about all of these comedians over the years that they have all now moved to the concept of podcasts and videos and those types of things. And all of them, their careers are now going through the roof because of it. People consume video far more, which means people create video far more. As much as you say that it's like it's easy to do that, you know, just add more storage, the inevitability is that eventually this is going to have to go far beyond just the storage scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I can say to you, one of my big fears was, and Jeremy, you know, you and I probably talked about this, that one of my fears was that we were making more storage than we could manage. Okay, yeah. So 5 years of making more media. 5 years ago, I was concerned that we were making more media than we could manage. If your methodologies change and if you implement the tools that we now know how to implement and build, then I no longer have that fear. Right now, that doesn't mean you can do it the old way you were doing, right? So the methodology hits a wall, but there is no ceiling now because we can manage as much as you can make. And that's your point. Is exactly right, Scott. There is a point at which you no longer can just buy storage. You do need to manage it, but understand that when you start looking, like right now, North Shore just added 2 new people in the last 2 weeks, and those people come from big data. They don't come from media and entertainment. Yeah. They come from big data, data analytics, because that's the skill set we need now, because we're not managing. I have 10,000 files. It's like, you know, one of our clients last year had 28 million files to deal with, you know, and we were like, yeah, okay, what do you do with that?
But they manage that on the spreadsheet,
right? Yeah, right. Well, actually, you're gonna love this. Is that until, by the way, they were. And as a result, they had a gigantic problem with duplication and management, right? And we came in, and we literally came in, and that was the mandate, to lift them out of spreadsheets into a DAM. Exactly. That's great. That's a good point, man. Thanks.
Okay, let's go on to the next topic. This was, Bob, I'm going to start with you on this one. This is all about you. This is all about the fight, and apparently the fight's over. So take us through the NAS versus SAN in 2020 and beyond. And again, I guess that I know the word evolution keeps jumping in here, but I think this is a prime example of that.
Yeah, and I do agree. I think the battle is over. Like I said, I've been at it for a long time, and one of the
tombstone somewhere we should be looking for.
What's that?
Is there a tombstone that we should be looking for?
No, not yet, because even though the battle's over, there's a lot of customers out there that are still SAN customers. They've spent a lot of money on SAN infrastructure, and there's years to go in supporting a SAN and clients that have invested in that. So it's
and there are gateways, right? You can convert SAN to NAS, you know, as a hybrid step.
Yeah, so it's really, at this point, it's, you know, if you're a greenfield operation and you're looking to build something, and you're asking, should I go NAS or should I go SAN? You should spend all of your effort in the research of the NAS. And the reason being, you know, SAN technology, fiber channel technology, it's going on 20 plus years. It's the same thing we've been talking about throughout this whole thing, is that we've evolved into something much better. So where SAN was needed because of performance and maybe because of capacity and file sizes and all that, it no longer is the case. And therefore, you really have to look at what's available out there in the industry. You don't want to buy an inexpensive NAS, cheap NAS, a NAS that hasn't been targeted for media workflows, because then you will fall all over yourself and you'll cause guys like Jeremy and Bryson heart attacks, seeing that you saved all this money to move into a NAS infrastructure only to make your life so much worse. So you really do have to educate yourself on, you know, people, companies, products that are focusing on media workflows, because you can go to, you know, NetApp or HP or any one of these big tier ones and say, hey, I'm building this great big or medium-sized media workflow, and I want to go NAS because I hear SAN's dead. Can you put that in for me? And they'll say absolutely. But is their product set for it? Has it been tweaked for it? Has it been tuned for it? Does it have all the things you need test it across your applications? No. And that's where the traditional IT NAS will fall down. So you have to go with a file system that's been tuned for large media files. You have to go with a file system that understands how to do tiering. You got to be able to split those large files with the metadata files so that you can optimize the performance from a complete workflow perspective. And then where NAS really starts to take over is not just the level of scalability, but again, when we talked about the automation that's built in or the feature set that the IT guys are going to want. And that's important. We have been talking for, I don't know, probably going on 15 years how IT and the creatives have always been clashing. And it got to a point maybe 7 years ago where IT was really starting to take over, and which isn't a bad thing because that's what these guys do, where the creatives, it was editors that were forced to be technicians and not do what they're supposed to do. So the fact that IT is taking over is okay, but the problem was that IT had a whole different mindset. They didn't understand that media is something different than what their normal data, small file database infrastructures were. So now we've bridged that gap over the last several years, and the creatives are more comfortable of giving up to IT. IT's more comfortable about understanding that there is some things that are very special about media workflows and the scalability of media. And when you can approach them with a NAS that takes care of all those little idiosyncrasies tied to media workflows, and then give them their snapshots and their replication and their no downtime and high availability, and throw all that in there, it's just a win-win for both sides. You built now something that you should never have to see. When the storage infrastructure goes back into the server room, it should just work. You should not be thanked for having a great system at all, right, Bryson? It should just work and do what it's supposed to do. And then the rest of your problems usually end up outside the server room. It ends up at the desktop in dealing with little desktop related issues or inappropriate OS versions that are on your desktop. Those kind of things are usually what end up causing the problem. But that storage should be in there, rock solid, protecting your data at all time. NAS does that now. SAN complicates things. We have different sets of drivers for the different types of operating systems, and it just doesn't have the feature set. So everything that you want to get done in the SAN is a bolt-on. You got to get a third-party bolt-on to make that happen. When you do that, you have to be trained in on how to support the bolt-on. IT is not going to learn how to do all these little different types of bolt-ons that are there. So NAS solves that problem as well. So it really came down to winning the battle. It came down to bringing the price point down from the NAS connectivity standpoint, building the performance, which is where the NVMe and the flash devices got to, and moving into inexpensive 25 and 50 gig infrastructure or beyond. That price point coming down, that performance level going up, just basically put a nail into the coffin for the SAN. I can say that because I've had block level, I've sold block level all my life SANs, and it's really, for me and my engineering team, we're so happy to say, I really don't want to sell you a block level device anymore. I want to move you into something that will make your life so much happier over the long term.
So for all of those points, Bob, that you just made, Jeremy, I want to ask you this, and again, I know I keep referring to you as the boots on the ground guy, but you really are. We mentioned like the different players in this, and it's like, it's like the kind of IT versus, sort of the creative folks, and then that started to blur, like, what are you seeing right now within, I'll call it that, social and financial structures within organizations where perhaps the battle isn't necessarily over just yet? Are you seeing pushback? Are you seeing, they're embracing it? Like, what's the general consensus over this of people that, again, I'm going to go back to using that word evolution again, but going through that evolutionary step to this, like, where do you see them struggling?
I only actually see a more positive future because, as Bob had mentioned, the way that we designed SAN solutions in the past, you know, we were leveraging traditional IT assets. We're just gluing them together differently than IT was trained in IT school, right? So a lot of the folks that we deal with or continue to work with have, you know, experienced that. And the same is true in, you know, the asset management world, right? You know, everybody had their my first MAM, you know, my first easy bake MAM, you know, my first SAN, and they've lived through that and evolved through that. And, you know, I think, you know, to Bryson's point earlier, the players in these conversations are actually changing. So now IT folks are coming to the table more savvy than they used to be.
Hey, Jeremy, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Answer the question for Scott. Here's the deal. On our first calls as the damn guys, right? Think about 4 years ago, how many times IT was on the first call versus this year.
Yeah.
How's that changed?
Yeah, exactly. They are a stakeholder in the project, right? IT is a stakeholder in the project now. You know, which means
we used to hide from them.
Yeah, we used to hide in the corner, like, oh God, there's the, you know.
People still hide for certain reasons. I don't know.
Yeah. So it is changing, and it's actually, that's why I say it's a green, you know, it's a greener future, because it's always difficult, you know, when you're, you know, I mean, obviously you're still putting physical assets in the rack and you're racking up a server and you're in that room, and it's kind of awkward when the IT guy or the team at that point is like, well, you need to do what with what now, and who let you in this room, and all of that, right? So it is nice to have all of the stakeholders that are there to not only benefit from the solution itself, but help support the solution, to be a part of the conversation up front. And to Bob's point, you know, IT organizations have been working with NASs for years. Now the hardware, now all of the technology is caught up to the pace of operations for video and content creation. Right. So that's where we're actually colliding in a good way. You know, we're not bringing in these crazy weird black boxes anymore that some IT security guy is going to want to take a closer look at. It's like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing here. You've got you know, basically great assets that you know, fit within all of the rules of their IT organization in terms of how they deploy, how they support, how they maintain security. You know, when we're able to adhere to all of that, we're actually, you know, it's a great win-win for everybody.
Bryson, let me ask you this on this topic. I mean, it's, you know, you made a really good point as far as like the number of IT folks that are showing up more and more now. It's much more of a collaborative environment, I will say. What's the most common conversation that comes out of these meetings now, as opposed to even what it was maybe a year or two ago?
It's always security, right? It's always security, it's always reliability. So right. North Shore has acted, and we've invested internally. You know, we were IT guys. People think that I was a video guy. I came out of the IT, so did my co-founder. And so for us, we've always maintained we've been a strong liaison between IT, because you understand that in our world, we're dealing with web servers, we're providing web services and database services and all that. So that should not be a video person managing it, right? So I want to say first to anyone who's watching this, you know, build a relationship with your IT people if you don't have one, right? Your IT people are not wrong, because IT has a higher standard of performance than you do, right? IT are the people that are keeping everyone safe from everything that's going on out in the world, right? So in the old days, it was like, oh, the IT guys don't understand, they won't let us edit. Understand that they have a higher bar to reach. So for me, it's always reliability. It's always, you know, it's reliability and security, right? Like you said, you know, Bob, you mentioned it. No editor wants to be the person replacing a drive or something. And I can tell you that in my experience working in storage, in the old days, we would lose data. I've seen customers lose terabytes of data. I've seen shows go away because somebody did not have proper management of their system, right? Right. So that's the first thing there. But
which is great. I mean, that is huge, because these are not the people who should be doing this. Now, to your point, Bryson, I used to run from IT. Now I run from editors. If I go in and I say, hey, are we going to virtualize this environment? And they say, well, you know, I'm really an artist. I'm like, oh God, okay, get an IT guy or show me who your IT guy is, right?
Yeah, like how long did we suffer through tiny underpowered servers on CatDV because the editor was comfortable with a Mac Mini or something, so that's what you got, right? North Shore was controversial years ago when we started rolling out these giant, you know, virtualized Linux servers, and everybody was like, whoa, 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 I don't know what that is. And it's like, look, I'm sorry that, you know, you weren't able to hire the guys that I was able to hire, but I just went and found smarter people to build better systems, right? So I want to give you one thing though, Scott, that I want to call out is that, well, two quick things. One, somebody brought up to me recently, a reseller brought up to me that they were sort of shocked by the move from ScaleLogic to NAS. And when they, you know, like, oh, the NAS, and I thought about it, and I was like, I was like, yeah, okay, but it bugged me, because it's like, well, yeah, I mean, like I said, for me, that was sort of an obvious move at this point in the world when you look at what networking can do and all. But people always ask us, what about storage? And we don't really have an opinion, right? We honestly don't. But these are sort of the Jones's, you know, Jones's fifth law of storage, and that's the core needs that we need as an asset management, you know, team. And so we need reliability and availability. So enterprise, not, you know, I didn't buy this off of Amazon somewhere, you know, with 4 drives in it or whatever. We need it to be as big as you can afford. We need it to mount to all operating systems, even ones that you don't even know that you have in your building, because people forget we're a Mac shop. Yeah, but you have Telestream Vantage, that's Windows. Yeah, you have, you know, some, you know, other piece that's, you know, that whole cloud is Linux basically. So mount to all operating systems with no client software required. And it must be able to auto mount with no human intervention. Why? Because I don't want to pay you and I don't to do it, and I don't want it to break when you don't do it. I want it to happen automatically, right? North Shore prefer a NAS gateway. Even if it's a SAN, we prefer that you have a NAS gateway on that SAN, just for simplicity for the items I mentioned above. And then the last thing is really weird. We say, and this may not fit into your narrative here, but Bob got to talk a lot about this, so it's all good, and he's paying for this, so it's great. Speed is nice, but it's not always as critical for us. It's not always as critical for asset management as editing and production. So for us, above a certain minimum of size within reason, we prefer size over speed, right, for asset management tasks. Now, again, I'm not color grading, you know, 8K red, right? So I'm not worried about it. But I will say that for us, we feel that in the modern world, to your point, we feel that most modern enterprise NASs can provide more than enough speed for automated processes, and we're no longer worried about the speed of the storage as much, you know, as like you said, as editorial might be. Yeah.
You know, and a lot of resellers have asked that same question to us. We've been spending time with them to educate them, and it's not that we put our foot in the sand and just said, okay, we're moving over to NAS. We've always had a NAS product line. That NAS product line happened to be used more for second tier, like you're saying, or as a gateway. And it wasn't until the last, you know, 2 years that the technology, the cost came down, the technology improved, the performance improved, that we all started to see that we could take that second tier and turn it into primary storage for almost every application, every workflow that we're seeing. And the beauty of that is now you can build a system pretty much at the same price point as you were on this lower expensive second tier, all under one platform. So now you can scale and have that single file system that gives you the petabytes. And you don't have to be tiering from multiple different types of storage to save money. You can do it all on one, manage it all on one, get rid of all that duplication, you know, integrate better with the media asset management that's out there, and drive that complete automation. So it's just kind of a perfect storm that's come together to get us to where we are today. Makes my life easier, makes your life easier, and then bottom line, it makes our customers' lives so much better.
To sum that, it makes it cheaper to automate, because you're not managing 20 volumes and permissions around those volumes. So it's cheaper to automate, and it's more reliable. My customers are happier with me when they're operating on large single namespace NAS, right? That's the deal. If you have 20 volumes in your infrastructure, you are not going to be happy with us, because we're fighting the storage to make it all work, right? It's like computers are dumb. They just want to do the same thing over and over, and they don't know. You know, Sarah will know to move it here and not here and all that, but the computer doesn't. So I will say that yeah, you can, in 2020, you can start to simplify, and that yields, I mean, there's in any type of business, that's the thing. The simpler you can make it, the better it is. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, as promised, this is where I step in as the referee. We have come up to our hour, almost pretty much exactly. So first and foremost, thanks, guys. Like, this has been highly informative, fun. We got to make fun of Bryson's beard. I don't know what else to ask for. This is
Perfect hang.
everything we could do. And for all the attendees, if you have any other questions, please, the phone numbers are up on the screen here, as well as the email addresses. Send us, you know, any questions you got. Give us a call, whatever it may be. The guys are around to answer any questions. You want product info, you want to talk to any of the guys that have been on the panel personally today, reach out on here, and we will definitely set that up. So everybody, thanks for your time, guys. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
All right,
Thanks.
sounds good. Thanks, everybody.